Good morning, it's Friday Thoughts. Friday Thoughts, just saying it with an F. So I want to talk about autistic adults and what that looks like. And obviously it looks like a whole range of different things because we're all people and we're all different. So here's part of the problem, right? The criteria around autism for the longest time is based around behaviour in children. And for the longest time, we've continued to base it off, Kanner's 1943 paper on autistic children. And we also based it off the findings of Hans Asperger when we were still using the term Asperger, separate from autism, which we don't do anymore. So a lot of people look at people like me when it's said that we're autistic, and they have such a resistance to believe that because they don't see any of the stereotypical behaviours. So you won't see me stimming in public, or you might if you know what you're looking at. If you have a radar, if you're autistic, you'd probably know straight away. But there's an expectation that adults will get around behaving in the same way that children with significant support needs who are autistic behave. Now, here's the thing about that. Sometimes when an autistic person has higher support needs and requires care, there is a greater disconnect between their mind and body, their brain and body. So they lack the control to stop themselves from engaging in certain behaviours, particularly sensory-driven behaviours. So, doing things that we would consider dangerous, walking out in front of cars or putting their hands in fire or jumping into water or perhaps smearing their feces or getting into hot oil on the stove or whatever it is. Sometimes people who have significant support needs, their bodies do not follow the intention of their minds. So we're still creating therapies around correcting that, which is a bit counterproductive really because it's a lifelong thing. Now, the problem here is that, again, people who don't really understand or know autism are looking for the same kinds of behaviours or autistic expressions or presentations in adults. And the truth is, you probably won't find that unless an adult has significant support needs, high support needs requiring care. Another way to identify autistic adults is somebody who lives with an eating disorder, somebody who lives with alcoholism, drug addiction, mental health challenges, somebody who perhaps has OCD, somebody who might engage in hoarding to a significant degree, somebody who lives with anxiety disorders or depressive disorders. Now, here's the thing about this. We tend to, with adults, because we've missed so much of what autism actually is for such a long time, we tend to focus, or healthcare professionals tend to focus on isolated characteristics of autism. So a person might present to a GP and say, I'm anxious all the time. So the GP is going to treat the anxiety. It would be very rare for them to say, okay, let's explore the possibility that you might be on the autism spectrum, because really they'd have no reason to do that. However, we know that ongoing anxiety can be a characteristic of the bigger picture that is autism. Now, my good friend Pia, who is a PhD student at the moment, just co-wrote an article about autistic adults and barriers to healthcare, and it was just phenomenal. So what was uncovered is that the first barrier for autistic adults in healthcare is the lack of understanding and knowledge of what autism is and how it looks in healthcare professionals from their perspective. So our first port of call is usually a GP, or we might ask for a referral to a psych or a psychiatrist. And many people assume that these people would for sure know about autism. What you'll find is they might know about Kanner's version of autism, the 1943 document, but they won't necessarily know about the 2013 DSM-5 updated revised edition of selection criteria. I like to say selection criteria, because not many people would, unless it's your special interest or your passion. You're probably not going to go exploring, learning everything there is to learn about autism. So a lot of people do go to a GP saying, I'd like a referral, I'd like to be assessed for autism. I've been thinking for a while now. Sometimes it's parents of children who have been diagnosed. And healthcare professionals are very, very quick to say, if you can drive a car, if you can study, if you can get through life, if you can speak, then you can't be autistic. If you're social, you can't be autistic. I've had it said to me, you're too warm to be autistic. And here's the thing about being autistic. It's a very hard thing to express when somebody says, so what does it mean? How are you autistic? Well, that's like me asking a non-autistic person, well, how are you neurotypical? Or how are you non-autistic? How do you encompass all that information? And it's different for every person. So that's a problem. Another barrier was being able to access healthcare. So the environments of doctors' surgeries, very loud, long waiting periods, and again, the lack of understanding or knowledge of autism means that in consultation with a GP or somebody, there's going to be communication barriers and misunderstandings. And I know for me, I rarely go to GPs because I've had a really hard time and been really let down, and it took me into my adult life to be diagnosed with several co-occurring conditions because I was never taken seriously. And as an adult, the first thing that happens is no matter what I present with, no matter what I say I'm there for, as soon as they find out that I'm the parent of children who are autistic, they come to the conclusion that my symptoms are psychosomatic, all in my head, because I'm living with copious amounts of stress as a result of parenting autistic children. So they completely dismiss and overlook my identity as a person, and I don't get the help I need. And that really sucks. And so many families go through that. Do you know that autistic adults are 4 times more likely to suffer from depression? Autistic adults are 16 times more likely to die from suicide. Autistic people have a significantly shorter lifespan. We're lucky to make it to our 40s. And those are current stats. Heart disease, epilepsy, and suicide. Now, when you go through your whole life knowing you are different, and we do know we're different, sometimes we get misdiagnosed with other things, such as bipolar, again, depression, anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder. There's so many things. And there's such a resistance to people understanding that there's not an epidemic. There's nothing in the water. There's nothing going on to cause autism. It's that we have a greater understanding now of what autism looks like. And when our professionals, our educators, our healthcare professionals, all of the most significant professionals working with us, our families, our children, lack the understanding and lack the acceptance, then we're actually contributing to those mental health conditions and those barriers and those co-occurring conditions. Because over time, many of us develop co-occurring conditions like autoimmune disease because we are so burnt out, because we haven't had access to the care that we need, the support we need. And when we don't have professionals to guide us through exploration of our autistic identity and our support needs, how do we know where to start? So I'd really encourage you, if you are not familiar with autism in adults, do some reading, ask some questions, watch some videos. There are so many fantastic, not only advocates online, but just autistic adults who write, who create content about their lives and what they live with. And it's so important to be able to identify this, because also it gives a lot of really useful information about the future that our children potentially have. Yeah. Anyway, I never know how to end these things. That's the end.